Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to go over Oda's Q&A just after he released the SBS 110. Let's start off with the first question. The person asks, how does Luffy pull out the baseball bat and the goggles basically from the scarf looking cloud around his body? They call it a Hagoromo. And Oda says that this is the entrance to Nika's fantasy. This brings me back to an idea that I've discussed before on how Devil Fruit awakenings actually affect the environment around the Devil Fruit user. The best example is when Luffy is on Onigashima and he goes gear 5th and he's just bouncing around. You can see him literally affecting the ground underneath him and turning that into a rubbery like substance. So it's very possible that the source of his power is basically coming from this cloak or scarf around Luffy's body, and that's why we see this around other Devil Fruit users. Even when Lucci is awakened, he gets this kind of black scarf around him. This makes me wonder if Luffy's going to be able to expand this region that this cloud covers to basically make the whole environment around him a part of this fantasy, quote unquote. Oda also phrased it specifically. He stated Nika's fantasy. I wonder if this is somehow connected to Nika's dream. As we know, Luffy has a dream and it's a hidden dream that he shared with Roger. I wonder if this is the same dream that he would also share with Nika. And it's almost like an inherited will that's passed down to each potential Joy Boy. I feel like if Luffy's actually able to expand this region of effect from his Devil Fruit, it'll be similar to domain expansion from Jujutsu Kaisen. Like Luffy can already affect anything he touches. For example, when he jumps literally inside of Kaido and somehow turns Kaido into a basic like rubber snake. Moving on to the next question, a person asks about the Maramara no Mi and how Sabo is now using that fruit to its fullest. But they also asked if Sabo actually trains with the fruit. And Oda tells us that Sabo is training with his fruit every day, and to remember that Sabo just regained his memory. He's remembered a lot of things. And this made me wonder, what kinds of things did Sabo remember? Maybe he recalled something about how he was raised by nobility, and he knew some kind of secrets that were passed down between the celestial dragons. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of information Sabo has. But for real though, why did someone ask about Sabo training? Of course he freaking trains. Let's get to the details that we actually want. And speaking of, this is a detail that we kind of expected, but going on to the next question, the person asked if Dragon ever lived with Luffy. And Oda tells us no actually, but only to Luffy's memory. This definitely implies that Dragon was there during Luffy's birth and a little after. It's likely that once Luffy was born, his mother passed away and Dragon left to lead the Revolutionary Army. And Oda tries to give us the whole spiel to see from Dragon's perspective on how he tried to protect Luffy from being involved with the Revolutionary Army. And we can see from Kuma and Bonnie's perspective. The fact that the world government knew about Bonnie from the start, it was easy leverage for them to use. And they ended up forcing Kuma to become a robot. So it's obvious if the world government knew about Luffy from the start, they would hunt him down and use him as leverage against Dragon. However, this doesn't cover how we haven't seen Dragon in the story since Logtown. Even at Logtown, Luffy had a bounty about 30 million, and Dragon could have easily linked up with Luffy. However, it's clear that Dragon is a very important character to the rest of the story, and Oda doesn't want to give us any hints. And as we're talking about mysteries, someone asked Oda about the Saber of Zebek, the name of Blackbeard's ship, and if it's related to Rocks D. Zebek. And Oda just says that it might be a coincidence, it might not be a coincidence, but it's clear that it is not a coincidence. Zebek is definitely an inspiration for Blackbeard's ship, and there's definitely a connection between Blackbeard and Rocks. People have been theorizing for years that Blackbeard is Rocks' son. Rocks' backstory must give away way too much information, and Oda doesn't want to give us any inklings of that information. He is way too critical to the story, looks like. Moving on to the fifth question, Oda is asked about Shanks using Divine Departure and if he learned it directly from Roger. Oda tells us that Shanks actually learned this by himself just by remembering what Roger did. And what makes this even more impressive is that no one else on the Roger Pirates could replicate this move. Only Shanks. So right there, Rayleigh and Odin are thrown out of this. So it might have something to do with the level of Conqueror's Haki. And I wonder if this implicates that Shanks is on the same level in terms of Conqueror's Haki as Roger. This would be epic if it's true. I also wonder if there's going to be a character in the future that will also be able to perform this move. Now I want to get to the craziest information that we learn in this entire Q&A. We get the official numbers for the Cross Guild bounties. And we learn that the Fleet Admiral is worth 5 crowns, and each crown being worth 1 billion. Thus, this means that Akainu is actually worth 5 billion berries, putting him at the 3rd highest bounty in all of One Piece, just after Roger and Whitebeard. This man is not to be trifled with. I started laughing about the agenda that people have been discussing since long back, whether the Yonkos are stronger than the Admirals or if the Admirals are above the Yonko. And in this case, we saw Akainu previously as an Admiral, and he got raised to the level of Fleet Admiral and is now worth one of the highest bounties we've ever seen. So it's evident that it's not black and white who's actually stronger between the Admirals and Yonko. There's a lot of gray area in there. And honestly, this makes Marineford make so much more sense since Akainu went toe-to-toe with the man himself, Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world. This dude is no joke. I always go back to what Oda said about Akainu long ago. He said that if Akainu was the main character of One Piece, the story would end in a single year. I almost feel like people have been underestimating Akainu this entire time, and this brought his hype back all the way up. We still haven't seen any Logia awakenings yet in the story. Akainu's will be off the charts, we already know. Like, look at Punk Hazard. That island was literally split in half between magma and ice cold. I also think that Oda is kind of trolling the community here. He definitely sees all these debates that we have about who's stronger, and he wants to keep us guessing. And speaking of Punk Hazard, we get some more information on Kuzan, about how Kuzan actually has some subordinates of his own, and his decision to join Blackbeard's crew doesn't necessarily mean he's on the path of evil. He just wants to be living freely without anyone telling him what to do. But Oda adds this little tidbit saying that Kuzan has definitely been involved with some casualties from the Blackbeard pirates. This really shows us that whatever goal Kuzan is pursuing, the ends justify the means here. Death isn't something new for Kuzan. He's been very familiar with it in his time with the Marines. He's been involved with buster calls, entire genocides of races, and erasures of islands. So working with the Blackbeard pirates where there are a few casualties here and there, it's not much different to what he was involved with before. The only difference here is that he doesn't have to follow any orders and is able to search for whatever he wants. From Kuzan's perspective, both sides are really evil, so what really is the difference? Now moving on to our 8th question about how Fujitora and Greenbull were added to the Marine Forces. In the World Military Draft, Oda tells us that each country has its own soldiers for protection, and the World Military Draft basically drafts from this pool of candidates. But apparently due to this draft, this has actually helped the 8-Nation Revolution, as each country's forces were diminished and they had nothing to fight against the revolutionaries. The Revolutionary Army was basically just taking down fodder and taking over these countries. Hence why the Revolutionary Army has been able to stir things up so much that now at this point they're attacking Marijoa directly. And they're literally cutting off the Celestial Dragon's food supply. All of this is pointing to the Holy Knights coming into play, and I can't wait for them to take on the revolutionaries. The Holy Knights are bound to have some insane abilities. Yet nothing is as insane as this Rocky Port incident. The 9th question asks Oda about what actually went down at the Rocky Port incident and how this led to Kobe becoming the hero. And Oda doesn't want to get into any of the details, but he basically tells us that Law was actually taking over a passenger ship. However, this passenger ship was incognito and was actually a smuggler ship headed to Hachinosu. And Law ends up getting into some serious trouble with these pirates, and I'm guessing the pirates at Hachinosu. And he's joined by Kobe and Blackbeard, who came for their own reasons. It's likely that Blackbeard was looking for some more information on Rocks Dizabek, as the ruler of Hachinosu was Ochoko, who was a former member of the Rocks Pirates. So Blackbeard was definitely looking for some more information on Rocks, and it looks like Kobe, Law, and Blackbeard had to team up against Ochoko and his forces to finally be able to defeat him, and Blackbeard ended up taking over the island. Kobe ended up being claimed the hero for taking down Ochoko, and Law just became infamous for being involved in this entire incident. The only sad part is that Oda's apparently not going to include this in the rest of the story going forward, so this is all we're going to get. Not much to go on here, but maybe learning about Rocks' backstory will clarify some of the things that happened here. And last but not least, let's discuss Figarland Garling. And someone asked, is Figarland Garling strong? And Oda says, of course he is strong, there's a reason for his strength. This brought up a bunch of questions in my head, whether Figarland Garling has some kind of special ability. I feel like it's definitely related to something with the Figarland family and their red hair. But really there's no other clues here, so I don't know what to think about this. This Q&A was absolutely epic, and we learned some very interesting information. A lot of dead ends here, but still very cool on Oda's part. It's sad to see how we have to get a lot of these questions answered outside of the story. I would love for a lot of this to be added in the main story. I feel like even after One Piece ends, there'll be a ton of mysteries left over, and we'll have to tie them all together to see how they all fit. One Piece literally never ceases to amaze me. That's all I got, guys. Like and subscribe for more, and I'm out. Deuces.